first off, how you doing this morning?
I'm doing fine. Happy to be with you. So thank you very much for the opportunity to share my story with you.
Yes, sir. And we were just chatting about how the connection through your grandchildren and then also your sons being in Greenville too. But it's an honor to have you. And the first kind of question is, were you born in Charlotte?
I was born in Charlotte. I was a twin.
Okay.
I had a twin brother, Bill,
Mm-hmm.
and my parents were actually living in Pageland, South Carolina. But the nearest hospital was Charlotte, and the pediatrician or not whoever was delivering the baby said, "You got to come to the hospital to have these boys." Well, they didn't know whether it was boys or girls back in those days, but he said, "You got to have these babies. You got to come to the hospital." So we went up to my mom and dad drove up to Charlotte, and we were born in, I think, Presbyterian Hospital, and then they came back to South Carolina, but my birth certificate was Charlotte.
Yeah.
But we grew up in South Carolina. We did live in Charlotte when I was in the first grade, though.
Okay.
My dad was with Travelers Insurance Company, and they traveled around. So I remember living in Columbia, and then after the war, this during World War II, and then living in Charlotte, Tennessee. We just moved all over when I was young. My twin brother and me. His daddy got transferred from office to office with Travelers. And, anyway, we ended up, after World War II, we came back to Lancaster. We came to Lancaster, which was close to his town. He grew up in a little town called Pageland.
Okay. Hadn't
really changed much in 60 years, 70 years.
Those small towns in South Carolina, they really haven't.
No. And anyway, that's where we grew up.
I read you and your brother Bill enjoyed playing golf a good bit together.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, we started playing golf when we were in. Let's see, I think we moved to Lancaster about 1947, so we were about 12. About a year later, my dad and mom had rented this house, and we were up in the attic, and there's some golf clubs up there. So we asked, and they had a little 9-hole golf course in Lancaster that was actually financed by Spinx cotton mills.
Oh, okay.
They were very good about having stuff for their employees. They had a big place out on the Catawba River and between Great Falls and Lancaster. Anyway, we went out to the golf course, and my dad said, "I'll let you pay for your lessons." And so the little 9-hole golf course, this pro said, "Can you teach us to play golf?" He said, "Yeah." So why don't you swing? And my brother swung right-handed, and I swung left-handed. He said, "Well, I can teach you to play to my brother, but I can't teach you to play left-handed. So why don't you change over?" So I said, "Well, fine with me." So I changed to right-handed playing golf. So,
dang, were you riding left or right-handed at that time?
I'm still riding left-handed.
Okay.
There are two things that I do right-hand, and that's fly airplanes and play golf. Everything else is left-handed. I shoot left, I fish left.
All right.
So
that's people that can do things with both hands. That's really incredible to me. With you growing up and you looking at your life experience, I mean, you've done some of the most amazing things, honestly, in the world. When you were growing up, did you aspire to be an astronaut? What you thinking, kind of what you want to be when you were growing up?
I was, I was 24 years old when the term astronaut was invented. So growing up, there was no dream of going.
No going to the moon.
No going to the moon. No going into
awesome.
Space. Probably put you in the state asylum down in Columbia if you had those kind of thoughts. Back in those days, and so, but I did. It was beginning of the jet age, and I'm talking about like 15 years old. We were. That's 1950. Yeah, 1950. And there's contrails going all over up there, you know. nice to make a contrail. So I think that induced me to go help me to decide to go in the military, because my dad had been in World War II,
Mm-hmm.
and the World War II guys were my heroes.
Mm-hmm.
And so my dad had been in the Navy for 4 years during World War II, and
Mm-hmm.
so I decided, well, I think I'll go to the Naval. I'd like to try to go to the Naval Academy and follow him in
Mm-hmm.
the Navy. So I got an appointment. This was in my 10th grade. I was 10th grader, and but we looked at the exams that you had to pass to get into the Naval Academy, and Lancaster wasn't going to hack it. So my parents sacrificed and sent me off to a boarding school, all boys military boarding school called Admiral Farragut Academy down in St. Petersburg, Florida. And the headmaster was a South Carolinian that had grown up in Edgefield and was a friend of my mom's.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how we ended up picking that school. And so I went down there as a 11th grader and a 12th grader, graduated, passed the exams for the academy. They gave me a good background in taking tests and being able to pass. And I passed the physical, so I went off, started the Naval Academy class in 1957. I was in the summer of 53, and it was a great advantage because when I got to the Naval Academy, I knew how to salute,
Mm-hmm.
I knew how to carry a rifle, I knew how to put my uniform on, I knew how to make my bed. So not living by myself, but living independently as an 11th grader and a 12th grader really matured me in a hurry, all boys school. So, and I liked it all. And so I got to the Naval Academy, and I was one step ahead of the other plebes, the freshmen.
You had already been doing that a little bit for a couple of years.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which you can think, I mean, being, a young male that age, kind of being put in that environment almost during your high school years, you're going to develop a good bit quicker too.
Mm-hmm.
And learning those life experiences.
You sure mature
Mm-hmm.
in a hurry because you got nobody to make your bed, nobody to wash your clothes. Well, we had laundry, but we didn't have to wash clothes ourselves at Farragut. So it was a good experience, and then so I got to the Naval Academy, and I guess my second year they gave us some rides in an old pre-World War II seaplane,
Mm-hmm.
open cockpit, single engine, and you sat in the front, the instructor sat in the back, and so they had two sailors with a big crank, and they cranked this big radial engine, and they cranked it up, and off you went, put, and off we took.
Dang.
And that hooked me. I said, I'm gonna be a pilot.
Dang.
So back then there was an Air Force Academy, and so they would allow 25% of West Point and Annapolis to volunteer for the Air Force, and so I could. I was thinking about, should I fly for the Navy or should I fly for the Air Force? And the Navy doctor, last year, my first class year, gave me a physical, and he said, I found astigmatism in your right eye, and that disqualifies you from naval aviation, but the Air Force will take you.
Dang.
So that's why I decided to go in the Air Force.
Were you testing a bunch of different airplanes?
Not then. Yeah. So I got in the Air Force, and I went to Spinx Air Base in Moultrie, Georgia for primary training. Flew T-34s and T-28s, and then I went to Big Spring, Texas, Webb Air Force Base for another 6 months, and I was flying T-33s, which was a basic trainer back in those days, And so I got my wings, and a year later, September of 58, and went back to Georgia to Moody Air Force Base for advanced training. And I was a fighter interceptor pilot, training to be a fighter interceptor pilot. By the way, when I was in flight school in October of 1957, it would be, Sputnik went up. And so that was the beginning of the space race.
Yeah.
And then over the next couple of years, you know, it was this tit for tat with the Russians, and finally we got a satellite up. And then in 1959, when I was headed to Germany for my first assignment, NASA was formed and the first astronauts were picked, seven of them. And so that was the beginning of and then the Russians were, of course, they were, now who's going to be first humans in space? Big race. Well, the Russians beat us by 2 weeks.
Dang.
And in 1961, Yuri Gagarin was launched on the Russians. He orbited. A couple of weeks later, in May, we had Alan Shepard go up into space, but not into orbit, and he came back, first American. And so 2 weeks later, Kennedy announced we're going to go to the moon.
That's an incredible speech.
Yeah. Well, the big speech was a year later.
Okay.
Okay, but the commitment was in late May 1961, and he said we're going to go to the moon.
I love the speech when it's like, because we do hard things.
Yeah,
we're
doing it because it's hard. Well, that was given in Rice University about a year later.
Okay.
But he'd committed to the moon a year before that, and you know, I was in Germany, and I was loving my job, and I was too young, not experienced enough, wasn't a test pilot, so I didn't think much about being an astronaut in those days. The amazing thing about we were laughing at him about commitments to the moon, and 8 years and 2 months later, I'm sitting in mission control talking in the Armstrong when he landed on the moon.
That's incredible. You did the comms.
Yeah, and it's a big thrill for me.
With all this going on in your professional life, how did you meet your wife?
When I left Germany in 1962, I was assigned to MIT to get a master's degree in aeronautics and astronautics. Still a bachelor, and I'd been dating a German girl, and I was dating a U.S. colonel's daughter. And anyway, four of us were bachelors, and we wanted to get out of the graduate school house and go in an apartment. So we rented this apartment, and there were 4 gals there. And so I went over one night to see if when they were going to move out. And they were from the University of North Carolina, and my wife, Dottie, had come to visit them, and she was bunking in with them while she was looking.
She wasn't even living there.
No, she was bunking in with them while she looked at a job and, found an apartment herself. So I met her that night, and we spoke for about an hour. The next day I went home. It was after summer school, and so I went home for a couple of weeks and told my mom I met the girl I was going to marry.
Let's go.
Yeah. And her name was Dottie Claiborne, and she was from Atlanta. And it was, to me, love at first sight. It took me a month or so to convince her that maybe she wanted to make it permanent. But we got engaged in not Memorial Day, but Veterans Day in November. And I'd never even met her parents. And she said yes, and said, but you got to come get permission from my dad. Christmas break, she'd gone home, and Christmas afternoon, I showed up at our house, sat down with her dad and met her dad and mom, and so asked him, would I'd like to marry your daughter. He said, well, okay, that's nice. So she had a big extended family, so next night they invited everybody over to have an engagement party, and that was nice. We got to meet all the cousins and all, and so they were very pleased. I was from the South, had a great job, few years old.
You're an impressive individual that time.
Yeah, and she was. So they were, I should say, they were very impressed with my maturity, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And so they agreed that, so we got married the next summer, June of '63. And first year of our marriage, I was finishing up MIT that year. And at this point, they selected a couple of groups of astronauts
mm-hmm.
by then. I think even the third group. And so I was doing my thesis on the Apollo guidance and navigation system, which MIT had the contract to build.
Mm-hmm.
And so I met some astronauts, and I've never met any guys that were so enthusiastic and pumped up about their job as these guys. So I asked them, I said, how did I get that job? They said, well, you got to get your degree, and when you graduate, go to test pilot school if you can get in, and you might have a chance when you graduate from there. So I followed their advice and
mm-hmm.
got my degree in the summer of '64. And Dottie and I moved to Edwards Air Force Base in California, which was home of the test pilot school
mm-hmm.
in the Air Force. And I started a year's course in a test pilot school. The next summer, I graduated in '65, and our first son had come along. I guess Dottie got pregnant when we were in our last year at MIT. No, it was maybe that summer. Anyway, Charles was born out there, and so my boss was head of the test pilot school was Colonel Chuck Yeager, who was a very famous test pilot, first guy to fly faster than the speed of sound. So he asked me to work for him. And so I took a job with him in July of '65, and 2 months later, NASA had another call for astronauts. And so I said,
did you see it in an article somewhere?
I'm sorry?
Did you see that in an article?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a article in Los Angeles Times, which was a big newspaper out there. And so I went to him and said, sir, I want to do this, but I'd like to apply. And he said, well, I don't know what we'll do, but we'll find out. So anyway, we applied, and there were 12 of us in my test pilot school class, and 4 of us applied for astronauts. And the Air Force was picking a group called the MOL astronauts, Man Orbiting Laboratory. And then NASA was picking, this would be the 5th group. So I only applied for NASA. I didn't want to fly for the Air Force in space. And so it was about a 6 months process. And in maybe February or March of 1966, they announced that our class of astronauts, and I got selected, and 2 other guys from my test pilot school got selected, and some of the others from Edwards, real test pilots. Mm-hmm. And so we reported to Houston in April '66, and I started my career as an astronaut.
With the, I guess, one of the main missions people talk about a lot is Apollo 11. With the Apollo 11, how did you get involved with being able to be head
Well,
of
and-
communications and all
Well,
that
and-
leading up to it?
Okay, in Apollo we had 3 crews.
Mhm.
We had the prime crew who was selected to fly. We had a backup crew that would take their place if they had a problem. And then a third crew called a support crew. Well, the support crews, we were the gophers. We had to do this, do that. We never got trained, but we just supported the crew, and that was checklists and all that stuff. So I was helping develop a team. I was on a team that developed the lunar module checklist.
Mm-hmm.
And this was Apollo 10, and it was scheduled to go to the moon but not land.
Mm-hmm.
But we would take the lunar module to the moon, and it would be the second time we took the lunar module, flown the lunar module, and the first time we'd taken it to the moon, and they were to simulate a landing but not land because the spacecraft wasn't able to land. So it would really a dress rehearsal for Apollo 11, which would be our first chance if everything went well on Apollo 10.
Mm-hmm.
So since I was support crew and developing the procedures, Tom Stafford says, well, why don't you be CAPCOM? And I said, that's fine with me, Tom. And it gave me an insight into mission control. And
Yeah.
so I was CAPCOM for that. And they started down on there, and then they aborted.
Oh, that's fine.
Let me turn this off. So
No, you're fine. No problem.
that happens to me a lot.
It's not live, so it doesn't really matter.
I was selected to be the CAPCOM
Mm-hmm.
for the descent, check out a lunar module of the descent. So everything went really well.
On Apollo 10.
On Apollo 10, yeah. And then the next mission was Apollo 11, which was our first attempt at landing.
Mm-hmm.
And Neil Armstrong said, Charlie, you did the same thing on Apollo 10 as we're going to do, so I want you to come over and work on my flight.
Yeah, why mess it up, you know?
Yeah. So Mission Control agreed, the flight crew operations agreed, Dick Slayton agreed that I would go do that. And so I ended up training for 2 months in Mission Control for their landing. And so I was selected as the CAPCOM for the activation of the lunar module and the descent and landing. And that was, Gene Kranz was the flight director. And we had a whole room full of flight techs and flight controllers. And the CAPCOM is always an astronaut, back in those days, always an astronaut. And it was the only person in mission control who had the authority to actually talk to the crew. So everything came through one side, everything came from mission control, the controllers to the flight director, and he spoke to the astronaut, the CAPCOM, and you spoke to the crew.
Yeah.
And you put it in not military terms, but you put it in flight terms so that pilots could understand.
Yeah, definitely.
So, and that all went really well. It finally was successful, but we had a lot of problems on the descent.
Mm-hmm.
We had communication problems and computer overloads and challenging decisions to make, you know, and would we continue with these, especially the computer overloads. But the flight controllers that were in charge of the computer and said, "We're go, flight, keep going." And so then at 7,000 feet, the vehicle pitches over and the crew sees the landing spot for the very first time from that altitude. And we had them targeted, so we had a trajectory problem. And so Neil leveled off and flew horizontally across the moon till he found a place to land. Well, that caused a fuel problem.
Dang.
So now we're at minimum fuel, and I called Houston 60 seconds. I called Eagle 60 seconds. And then I called Eagle 30 seconds, and they weren't on the ground. But according to my watch, 13 seconds later, I heard contact engine stop from the crew, and I knew they were on the ground. So big sigh of relief, and everybody cheered, and mission control. And Neil Armstrong, very calm, came back and said, Houston, Tranquility Base here, the Eagle has landed. And I was so excited I couldn't even pronounce Tranquility. It came out twang or something like that. But I corrected myself and said, Roger, we copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again.
Yeah.
And so it was all successful. And so after that, I was put on backup crew for Apollo 13 and helped, backup crew did a big job on helping get them back from after the explosion. It was the closest we ever came to losing a crew in space.
And that's the movie everybody knows.
The movie was pretty good.
Yeah.
I thought the movie, right before the flight, I caught the measles, and we had to change out. And Mattingly, who was supposed to go on the flight, had never had the measles, so the doctors wouldn't let him go. So they had to put in the guy I trained with, Jack Schweiker. And in the movie, they made Jack Schweiker look like he wasn't qualified, but he was probably the best command module pilot we had, and in a week from the measles, in a week he took Mattingly's place, and a week later they said they launched.
Dang.
So I mean, this training, it just proved how coordinated the training was between prime crew and backup. Yeah. Where you could substitute one guy. Anyway, it was successful, and we got it back. And then Mattingly came back on our crew, and so we were prime crew for Apollo 16. And it turned out it was 2 years later because they wanted to stay on the moon 3 days instead of 1 day. So they wanted a car that we could drive around in to increase our exploration area. And so all that took 2 years to get ready. So it was a 2-year.
And so that was not the lunar module?
Well, the lunar module, no, it was the car and the lunar module. Well, in the lunar module, we had to have bigger battery, more batteries. We had to have a bigger oxygen tank. We had to have a bigger water tank. Everything to last, but it was all had to be in the same same vehicle. Yeah. So and the car we had was folded up and bolted to the outside of the spacecraft. Dang. And it turned out to be a jewel and revolutionized lunar exploration because you could travel miles instead of 500 or 600 feet.
Dang. Yeah. With so going through Apollo 11, Apollo 13, were you always focusing on, hey, I might be the primary crew for an upcoming mission, and was that your goal?
Well, if everything went right, that's what you did. And the rotation, if you will, into the cruise was, if you're back up on 13, 3 flights later, you're going to fly on Apollo 16 if you don't screw up, and they announce you as a crew. So every third flight, they had from backup to flight crew was 3 flights on every Apollo. Okay. So that's the way I got on 16, and I was selected for lunar module pilot because that's where my experience was. TK Mattingly, 10, he came back on our flight from Apollo 13, and he was command module pilot, and John Young, who was a very senior astronaut, it's going to be his 4th flight. He'd flown on Apollo 10, and so he was going to be the commander.
Got it. With you fast forward a little bit into Apollo 16, you become the youngest human ever to walk on the moon. What was it like in the days leading up? What was training like before your mission? And then I kind of want to hear more about like takeoff and launch and all that stuff.
Well, training was very thorough, and the only bad part about training was our families lived in Houston, but the training was in Florida. That's where all the simulators were. That's where the spacecraft was going to be processed, and so we spent 5 days a week in Florida, and which was hard on the families.
Sure.
And, but it wasn't as hard as my other friends. They were in Vietnam, and so 2-year tour duty over there. And anyway, we trained, and it doesn't take 2 years to get ready, but that's what the spacecraft was. So you got training, you got the efficiency level, if you will, and you had to maintain your proficiency, if you will. We did a lot of geology. They wanted to make sure we pick up the right kind of rocks and knew how to identify rocks, and so we did a lot of geology training, and we stayed in shape, and we just came up to a proficiency level, max proficiency, and then we just tried to maintain that. It's like in a football season, a team.
An athlete.
They get trained up, and they want that same level of effort, and so that's the same it was in training for an astronaut crew. And so finally we were scheduled for a March 1972 launch. Well, in January I caught pneumonia, and I was in the hospital for a week.
Dang.
And I said, oh no, I'm screwed up.
It's gonna take you out.
They're gonna kick me off the crew, But our crew was delayed. Our flight was delayed a month. So instead of March, we launched in April. Gave me another month to get ready, get back into shape, continue my training, and so we launched right on schedule in April of 72.
Leading up to the launch, what are you feeling?
Well, it was exciting. I'm going to the moon, and I finally made it. And, there were 42 astronauts in those days, approximately. And only 20, it turned out only 24 of us got to go to the moon. So 18 of them didn't get to go at all. And so if you got to go once, you were terrific. There were 3 guys that went to the moon twice. John Young, he was Apollo 10. Gene Cernan was Apollo 10, and Jim Lovell was Apollo 8 and then Apollo 13. But nobody got to walk on the moon more than once. So that's just the way Apollo worked out.
Yeah. With you, so you have a successful launch and you're headed to the moon. How long does that take?
Well, it depends on the trajectory depended on your fuel budget that you had on board. We only have so much fuel to get into orbit at the moon and maneuver while you're in orbit, and then enough fuel to get you back out of orbit and back. So in Apollo, that required a time from Earth orbit to the moon of 3 days, 72 hours. And that, when you got to under that trajectory, when you got to the moon, you was going too fast to get into orbit, but you had enough fuel to slow down to get into orbit and enough fuel to get out of orbit and back. You can get to the moon a lot quicker, but you're going so fast, you need a lot of fuel to slow down and get into orbit. So all of Apollo was scheduled for 3 days, to the moon and then 3 days home.
All right, so you have a successful flight up there. What are the steps for once you get in orbit to land on the moon?
Well, we had a flight plan, and it was to get into orbit and then make sure everything was in the command module was secure, and we had a few experiments to do, And then John and I, the second day, I think in orbit up at the moon, John and I got in our spacesuits, and we opened the hatch, and I floated in the lunar module and started powering up. We had a power up procedure, and we had these. I think it took about 6 hours or so. I don't remember exactly, but we powered up the lunar module, and as I got in and started powering up, John floated in, and then we closed the hatch, and then we both started powering this thing up. And so once we got powered up, there was a flight plan that said, "Okay, undock." So Ken let us go, and we started flying basically formation in orbit, and still working on power up. And unfortunately, about an hour before we were to land, we were on the far side or the back side of the moon, and Mattingly had to change his orbit, and he required the main engine to fire to do that. Well, there's something wrong with the main engine, so he said, he described the situation. John said, "Don't burn." And so when he said that, we weren't going to get to land the next hour. So now, that was probably the lowest I ever felt in my life. 2 years I've trained, come 250,000 miles. There's my landing site, 8 miles beneath me, and they both tell me to come home. So you can imagine what a bitter pill that would be. Yeah. So mission control, we came around, we orbited, and they said, "Well, stand by." They looked at all of the data from the other spacecraft. We went around, and that was, well, we're working on it. We went around again and came back again. And they said, "Okay, we know what's wrong, and we can't fix it, but here's a workaround. And so you go for your burn, Mattingly, and then you guys will go for your landing on the next time around." Woohoo! Boy, did we just, our hearts came up, and we were so excited, and so that's what happened.
Yeah.
He made his burn safely, and we came around and started our descent, and from then on, everything was really good.
How long did you stay on the moon?
72 hours. We had 3 24-hour periods. By that I mean you had an excursion each 24 hours. You had an 8-hour sleep period between the excursions, and so it was outside. The longest I think was 7 hours and something. Anyway,
that's incredible.
Yeah. Anyway, we got about 21 hours out on the moon, I think, total. The shortest, we got cut short the last excursion because we used so much power in orbit, 6 hours late. I mean, landing, so we were fully powered up. So the batteries were going down, so they were concerned about battery power in the descent stage, and so they wanted to lift us off right on schedule, if you will. So we ended up 72 hours, but we didn't have, but our EVAs were cut short, the last one.
With what did you leave on the moon?
A couple of things. I mean, we left all of the experiments package. We left the car. So if you want a $8 million car with a dead battery, I can tell you where to go get it. And then I left a picture of my family. Charles and his brother Tom Charles was 7 and Tom was almost 5. So I left that picture of the family on the moon and took a picture of the picture. And it was the 25th anniversary of the birthday of the Air Force. So I left a coin in commemoration of that. I dropped on the moon. And we left our backpacks and all the stuff we kicked out the door because we didn't need it anymore. So we opened the hatch for a final time, kicked it all out, and we left the car, of course. It wasn't designed to come back. And so we lifted off with all of our rocks, 212 pounds or something like that, with rocks and soil samples. And all the film and some of the experiments that we left on the moon had been out on the moon. We wanted to bring those back, like solar radiation experiment and stuff like that. Anyway, once we landed on the moon, the mission just went just like that,
really?
Just like clockwork.
So landing back on Earth and everything was...
Everything back was just great. Yeah, we left Earth orbit, moon orbit, and we had an EVA or spacewalk to retrieve some film from the back end of the spacecraft. But Mattingly did that, and I just maintained his lifelines so that he didn't get tangled up. And then right on schedule, we hit the atmosphere, and it was spectacular. You're going like 25,000 miles an hour, 26,000 maybe. And when you hit the atmosphere, this big fireball develops around the spacecraft. And Apollo had what they call a skip out. And it didn't have wings, but it had lift. The center of gravity was off the center of the heat shield. So you came in with lift vector up like an airplane. And you hit the atmosphere, and it would bounce and bounce off and come back out again. And if you allowed that to happen, you were gone, dead.
So you got to break through.
Yeah. So what happened is you started back. Mission Control told us, okay, if autopilot didn't do it at this time, you manually roll over and turn lift vector from up to down, and that's going to pull you back into
Earth orbit.
Yeah, into Earth orbit.
Wow.
Well, not Earth orbit, but re-entry. Apollo never went into orbit on the way back. So we came straight in, right on schedule. Vehicle rolled over and pulled us back in as fireball all around the spacecraft, and we were decelerating like 7 Gs at maximum, and it was a spectacular ride, I'll tell you.
Gosh.
It wasn't bumpy though; it was just real smooth, and you just this fire around the spacecraft, and comfortable inside and 5,000 degrees outside.
Gosh.
And you could, as you came in, through the fireball, you could see blackness of space. When it rolled over, you could see the water, the ocean, and at 22,000 feet, the parachute deployment started. And,
y'all landed in the ocean?
Yeah, all of Apollo landed in the ocean, in the Pacific. And we were south of Hawaii about 2,000 miles.
What's, do you have a favorite memory from the mission?
Well, there's several. The liftoff was from Earth was very exciting.
Were you nervous?
Big rocket, it shook like crazy at liftoff first stage. Biggest rocket ever launched, still today. Space Launch System, it's going to be used for Artemis, is going to get bigger than Apollo was, but Saturn V. But right now, the biggest has been Saturn V. So it was very shaky. That was exciting. First view of Earth from about 20,000 miles. There it was, suspended in the blackness of space.
Having the palm of your hand out there.
Yeah, just in your hand. And then not re-entry, but into lunar orbit was pretty exciting. And we came around from the backside, and we had Earthrise. And it was beautiful, but my first thought was, we're a long way from home. I hope this thing holds together and gets me home. And which it did. And so that was exciting. And then, of course, landing on the moon, I'm on the moon. You know, you never lost that excitement for 72 hours. And then re-entry. You know, so there were a lot of exciting moments and a lot of great memories.
What was it like landing in the ocean?
Apollo Apollo landed at about 14 feet per second or so, which is like a parachute landing.
Okay.
And it hung at an angle under the parachute, so it would design basically to knife into the water like a diver.
Mm-hmm.
But we landed, the seas were 6-7 feet.
Dang.
And so the ocean, the waves were coming up, and so we landed flat on the.
Man.
And that was
like a belly flop.
Yeah, like a belly flop. And it really, in my head, I was looking out the window, wow, my head went back and didn't knock me out, but it was what happened here?
Yeah.
And so before I could I had to push a circuit breaker in on my side of the spacecraft to give power to his switch on the other side to jettison the parachutes. And by the time I got that in and he jettisoned, we flipped over and we were upside down. And the spacecraft's fine upside down except the hatch is underwater.
Yeah.
And you can't get out. So now we got these big balloons underwater, and we pumped up these big balloons and they flipped us back over.
Wow.
And so then now the hatches, now we're right side up, stable one it was called. And the Navy came along and put a big inner tube around us so we wouldn't sink. And then they knocked on the door and we opened the door and got out. We didn't have to go into quarantine, so we got out and got in a raft. A helicopter picked us up and took us back to the ship.
That's incredible.
Mission complete.
With to think about that experience is kind of mind-blowing to me. With missions complete, you're back on Earth. What did you think what do US think? What was the reception for the astronauts that came back from Apollo 16?
We had the prior crews, they had world tour, and they went all over the world. But we just did the United States, and we had huge crowds. The fifth landing, you'd think ho hum, but and that was what TV did. I mean, they didn't show much of our moonwalks live like they did Apollo 10, Apollo 11 and 12, etc. But we had great receptions we had Lancaster had my hometown had a Charlie Duke Day, and they had a big parade, and the whole town turned out, and I got to speak to the South Carolina legislature. We went to Washington. We spoke to the Congress. We had a huge parade in New York City. A lot of people showed up, and the same in Chicago, San Francisco, Seattle. So we hit the big cities around, and so it was a good reception. We spent at least 2 weeks, maybe 4 weeks on tour.
Yeah.
And we left our kids with, I think Dottie's parents, and Charles was 7, as I said. And so we went off, and they flew us around. And after that, they needed a backup crew for Apollo 17. And I said, John, why don't we volunteer for this? It was the last, they canceled 18, 19, and 20, so it was the last Apollo. And I said, why don't we volunteer for backup crew? He said, it's a dead-end job, and we don't want to do that. I said, John, if we volunteer and they break their leg, we get to go again. So let's take the chance. He said, hey, that's a good idea. So John and I volunteered. Well, Mattingly didn't want to do it, so Stu Rusa, who'd been Apollo 14 prime crew and orbited the moon, and Apollo 14, he came back. He volunteered, so the 3 of us were the backup crew. They stayed healthy, and we didn't get to go again. But
still,
who knows?
Yes,
so,
still.
So it was so exciting and get in shape. But then after that, Apollo was over in December of 72. And after that, a lot of us, the 12 of us walked on the moon, a lot of us, what are we going to do now?
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's the top of your career. And,
I mean, it's gonna be hard chasing that experience.
yeah.
You know.
So NASA wanted me to move to Washington headquarters and become assistant administrator for something or other. And Dottie and I thought about it, but our marriage was in really bad shape at that point,
Mm-hmm.
and got worse over the next several years. But I knew if I took that job or we moved to Washington, we were gonna get divorced.
Mm-hmm.
And, we didn't want to take that chance. So I stayed working on space shuttle for, 3 years, I guess it was. And so
Mm-hmm.
in 1975, I decided to leave NASA, go into the Air Force Reserves, and go into business.
Mm-hmm.
Took my eyes basically off the moon, put them on money. You know, we had a big problem. I was 36 years old, and I'm top of the ladder, what are you gonna do? I've done it, And so
still to this day, I mean, that's like one of the greatest accomplishments of humankind.
Yeah. And but you got a life to live, and you got a career, and
You got a family, like you said.
family, and so what do you do? And anyway, we in the fall of 1975, our marriage was basically going to end up in
Mm-hmm.
divorce, and my wife was suicidal. She was
Mm-hmm.
thinking about killing herself. This is all there is to life.
Yeah, I read some of that in articles.
Yeah. So I ended up, but some people, we were going to church, but Jesus was mental and not physical.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not in our hearts. So anyway, these people came to church, and where we were going, and spent a weekend with us, telling us, and they had a peace and a love and joy, and said it was all due to Jesus. And so Dottie, that weekend was over, and she prayed and said, Lord, if you're real, I give you my life. If you're not, I want to die.
Mm-hmm.
And this was in October of 75. And over the next 2 months, I watched her change from
Mm-hmm.
sadness to joy. It's real. I mean, her idea of divorce left. She's going to stick it out, and with God's help. And so 6 months later, we left NASA, and we moved to San Antonio, Texas area, and I was a Coors beer distributor for
Mm-hmm.
2 years, and made a lot of money, and but I was still, chasing money. But it was a lot. My marriage was getting better, but there was something still missing. And so I said, Dottie came to me one day and said, well, why don't you ask God to see if he wants you in the beer business? And I said, well, why don't you pray? I didn't know prayers. Nothing had happened physically in me or emotionally or mentally to accept Jesus at the same time she did. So
Mm-hmm.
it's now 2.5 years later, and 2.5 years later, and I said, why don't you pray? So she prayed prayers. Said, Lord, if you want Charlie in the beer business, give him peace. If you don't want him in the beer business, make it so miserable that he sells out. So I said, okay. So about 4 or 5 months later, it's really miserable, but the money's really good.
Mm-hmm.
So do you chase the money or do you chase peace? And so I decided to sell out, and that was a good decision. I was in March of '76. I'd been in the beer business 2 years. It was really successful, and but it just wasn't my job.
Yeah.
So I sold out, and I had a partner. We split up, and went our ways. And a month later, a friend of mine invited me to a Bible study, and at the tennis club in New Braunfels, Texas, where we lived. And that weekend, I had this enlightening, emotional experience with Jesus, and I realized that He is the Son of God, and He is the Savior. And I said, Lord, come into my life, and at that moment, I experienced the peace of God, Sam, and that was a tremendous revelation to me. And that started my walk with God. And so as a family, we started walking with God. And a year later, Charles came and to the Lord, and Tom, his younger brother. And our family's been trying to serve God ever since. And so it's, I'm now, Charles came to Furman as he grew up and liked Greenville, got a good job and got married, and so he was back here and we were still in Texas. And so about a year and a half later, we decided Charles had gotten remarried and now they got 6 kids between them, and so we decided, well, why don't we move back to South Carolina, where I grew up, and it was a big decision because we love Texas and the outdoors and the family, and we had Tom was there and with his 3 boys. Anyway, we decided to move back and come home, if you will, and we chose Greenville because of Charles and all the grandkids were here, his kids. And then Chaz, his oldest, got married and had a little baby, and so that was our first granddaughter. Yeah. And so we've moved back here and joined Greenville home state. Got a great church, and we travel a lot, but we got because as a motivational speaker, I get an opportunity to speak all over the world. Yeah. You're the and we formed a ministry, Duke Ministry for Christ, and we under that umbrella we travel to various churches and ministry groups and all over the world.
Very cool. Yeah. With you moving back to Greenville and being close to family, you mentioned to me before we started recording that, you're trying to find your happiness and find a career, and right now you are the only moonwalker still traveling.
That's right. Of the 12, there are only 4 of us left alive. Buzz Aldrin is the oldest. He was 93, Apollo 11. Then Dave Scott was a commander of Apollo 15. And Jack, his name's Harrison Schmidt, we call him Jack. He was a lunar module pilot on Apollo 17. He and I are 88, soon to be 89. And so we're the youngest of the 4 that left alive. And Jack's still a little active, but the other 2 guys have basically retired.
What do you do to keep in such good shape?
I've been working out since I was 30 years old, and so I try to even travel, take my stuff, and most hotels have a workout room now. So we use that. I walk treadmill, I pedal a bike, and I do weights and stuff like that. And just been blessed with good health. I watch my diet and try not to get overweight. And so but even with all of that, you could still get sick. Sure. But I've just been blessed and with good health. And I don't feel like I'm 88, but I am. And but I'm just thankful for the opportunity to have good health, so I can still travel and share my faith.
With I know you credit faith too, and all this. A lot of the articles I was reading to the life you've lived since NASA. With how much are you still involved with NASA? And kind of what do you think about some of the current programs?
I'm not officially involved with NASA, but I volunteered to go speak to the Artemis cruise, and I've been down to the astronaut office several times, and I've consulted with it was a company that was trying to go bidding on the new lunar. They call it the LTV, Lunar Terrain Vehicle.
Okay.
It was their car that they're going to have on the moon when they land. And and now I'm still, I got an interview with one of the crews coming up down in Houston, and I've basically informally, I get a question every once in a while from them, you know, and I want to be involved a little bit with the new spacesuits and give my opinion on whether you're on the right track or hey, this is really crazy or whatever.
I mean,
I think they're on the right track, but we don't know. So then I'm probably going to be involved with some of the once you land, what do you do, you know? And it's been 50 years, 55 years in July for Apollo 11. So anyway, I'm excited about that. They still want my advice on some things, and so I'm not sure they're going to follow. You know, they make their own decisions, and there's some things I'm not really so knowledgeable about that I don't want to just give them my opinion.
Sure.
You know, hey, this is going to work, I think, or this is not going to work. But they got a big job, hard job landing at the South Pole. Very rough down there.
Do they have a target date for that?
Well, it was supposed to be next year, but now it's all delayed.
Yep.
The first crewed Artemis is going to be probably next year early, and then the first that was just orbit the moon like Apollo 8. Then the next one's going to be a landing on the South Pole region, and that's probably going to be 26, maybe sometime in 2026.
I really hope we achieve it.
So hopefully NASA will be committed to it, and it's a big international program though, but the first landing is not so dependent on international cooperation. After that, they've got a big, what they call a gateway orbit, and it's huge, and around the moon, and takes 2 weeks to do the orbit, and, I think, and so they're going to have an international object there, and in the gateway, it's called, and it's some rendezvous with this vehicle that stays there, and then the lunar modules are going to be, the landers are going to be reusable.
Dang.
They're going to land, and then the whole thing's going to take back off again. And
that's incredible.
It is incredible. It's 100 feet tall. The one I saw, the model, the mock-up, and that's going to be very challenging to land a big vehicle like that in that rough terrain. So, but with good training and the new technologies they got, you know, of autopilots and terrain radar and all of that stuff, they probably
figure
it off, figure it out.
Well, Mr. Charlie Duke, it's been an honor having you on. Last question, as you and your wife, outside of speaking and, you know, traveling the world, what do you and Dottie do to still have fun? What do you do outside of that?
We got a lot of opportunities to get involved with grandkids. My son Charles and I our family's on a farm near Greenwood, and Chaz has gotten really involved down there.
He's hunting a lot, I think.
And so we get to help work out down there and
Nice.
cut grass. They let me cut the grass on the tractor, not do any plowing, but so we have it's a big family thing down there. So and we're building Chaz is really is sort of the building superintendent for we call it a bunkhouse, but it's basically that, you know, a place where we can have more people stay down there. We got a little cabin now, but it doesn't sleep very many, and only one little bathroom. So we're gonna have this, and so we look forward to spending more time. And Chaz and his brother Haywood, they've planted a dove field every year, so we have dove shoots and the deer down there, and got a lot of hogs, and so it's a lot of fun just going down there and spending time.
Yes, sir. Family time.
Yeah, a lot of family time. And I still got a lot of relatives, and we got relatives down at Pawleys Island, and
You still playing any golf?
I'm trying to get, but I'm so busy now. I haven't had even a chance to go practice, but I went out and bought 2 new golf gloves, and I got me a rangefinder and all that stuff. So I'm ready, but I gotta find some time to go practice because it's been over a year, and I'm not gonna play with Clayton. You know, he's a grandson. He's really good.
Okay.
Anyway, I want to play, but I haven't had a chance yet.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a pleasure hearing your story, and I mean, it's really, like I said, it's one of the most incredible feats in human history.
Yeah.
And I mean, you walked on the moon.
Yeah. Yeah, it was, and you know, we really, and I tell everybody, we really did walk on the moon.
Okay.
It was an adventure.
Well, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.